Welcome to Dark Loops Productions She-Hulking, a podcast for discussing Disney's new series, She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher at Illinois State University.
Hi, I am Dr. Shelly Clevenger, chair and professor of victim studies at Sam Houston State University.
Today we come together to discuss episode 6, Just Jen. Joining us on the podcast today are some amazing colleagues, amazing friends. Please introduce yourselves, tell the audience a little something about what you do and why you like this show, and we'll start with Brittani.
Hey, Brittani Oliver Sillas-Navarro. I'm a TAY lead clinician, so transitional age youth. I specialize in grief and loss, and I am out of Alliant International as a doc student. So defending next month.
Oh, fantastic. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah. What I like about the show and the episode is I love the comedy. I mean, I think that's kind of very obvious, but I do think that the character development over time is nice. I have a little quarrels with, do I think that She-Hulk needs to be so driven by love? But I do think that the very obvious insecurities and how it plays in a hero and how it plays in a woman is really interesting, and it's a new conversation that we're having.
No, that's fantastic. I'm sure that's going to come back up again as we talk today. Thank you very much. How about you, Elizabeth?
Thank you so much for inviting me to this, Scott. It's so great. I've been really enjoying listening to your podcast. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Smith. My Korean name is Yipang Shil, and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, mostly based out of Chicago, and also doing some nonprofit work nationally, a lot with the Asian Mental Health Collective, especially with the Lotus Fund, which pays for 25 people to have 8 free sessions of therapy with an Asian mental health provider. So that's one of the really cool projects to take a part of that I'm really proud of, and as well as NAP Chicago, which is the National Association of Asian American Professionals, are just a few of the nonprofits that I really like working with, in addition to working in a group private practice.
No, fantastic. And we're glad that both of you are here. So Elizabeth, why do you like this show?
I think that the show is wonderful in so many ways. As mentioned, the comedy is great. The concepts are wonderful. The breaking of the fourth walls and the commentary on society and societal aspects are so great. And just like this episode where Jen's going to a wedding, and at the same time, we're talking about how marriage can turn out in other ways in the superhero law division.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. All right, then. So we're going to start with a question from Shelly.
All right. So I liked this episode a lot. My favorite scene, which I'm going to ask you about, is we see Mallory and Nikki, and they are confronting Mr. Immortal's ex-spouses. And when we first see them, they're going to represent him, but then we see that they are actually maybe out for the women and helping, and former spouses, because there was a male spouse. So what are your thoughts about how that scene played out and how they ended up helping the spouses and maybe not so much Mr. Immortal?
You guys go first. I'll come in later.
I'll jump in. I think the shot where Nikki's on the table and even her body posture of just sitting very relaxed and comfortable with her legs crossed, and every single settlement is attuned to that specific spouse or ex-spouse. And so I think that was a creative way to tie in the question when they were like, well, I have a kid with this person. I was with them for 13 years. What's fair to me? And that's a really, really grand, socioeconomic question to have. What is fair? What is equitable? Not just in this situation, but in life. And to have that conversation of this is what you get based off of your, hardships, or based off of the experience that you've had. I think that is a bigger conversation about, so not just social justice, but what it means to be married
Mm.
and what we find fair. And as a, a marriage and family therapist, I'm sure that there will be a list of things that sometimes people don't just want money. Like the 20 seconds of eye contact meant something. And that meant more than a boat, or a house or something else. And so to personalize it, I think had a really feminine lens to say, like, this is what you deserve, this is what you want, and we want to listen to you, because a settlement of just cash flow might not be as meaningful.
From a legal standpoint, I think they did actually represent him because they noted that these could be criminal charges. And so in that way, they did represent their client. I don't want to say that, oh, that was definitely like a bad job on their part as professionally. I think that they did handle it professionally. And I think that this is a commentary on some aspects of how some people are very much not good with conflict. And some people do imagine often that they or their spouses get hit by a bus or something happens to that effect. Not that they're actually going to try to kill them or fake their own deaths, but a lot of people actually fantasize about this. And I think it was a really interesting commentary on that, as well as how people tend to bend the truth in different ways, and how culturally there are different aspects to how do certain conversations happen, how comfortable are certain people with confrontation. And if we go towards the end of the show, where there is something that Nikki and, oh gosh, I'm forgetting her name now, Mallory find out, and this this conversation of, do they tell Jen up front or not, is also another piece, right? Like, how much do people actually tell someone and how much do they not? And is that a caring thing that they're doing? Is it a cowardly thing that they're doing? There's a lot of different aspects to that too.
Yeah, there were two big points in that scene. One was, this is what the world would look like if men lived forever. Okay, that's that was Mr. Immortal is definitely a ever-present patriarchy, right? Second of all, there were a lot of really subtle social dynamics going on with a group of women organizing their grievances together in a way that they came to consensus was fair. And it wasn't Mallory that was doing it, it was Nikki. And I think Mallory, who's kind of in that world of hyper professionalism, saw something in Nikki that it's not that she lacks, but it's not part of how she's done her job. And you can tell she's thinking, this might be someone I would like to have working with me. I liked, but there wasn't jealousy in how she reacted. So there was this mutual respect across all the different groups of women that were in the episode. And I think that was very, very intentional, showing us people deliberating, come to consensus on fairness, and then mutual respect when someone's doing something that you're not as good at. So and it's just laced with such fantastic humor. I mean, that's for me one of the best ways to make these points, is to make people laugh while it's getting in, and then later they say, "Oh, wait a minute, that's an eternal patriarch."
Sorry, Scott.
No,
I was going to say, I thought it was funny too that instead of breaking up with these women, he, killed himself, which was a really strong commentary on how men don't like to have these tough, sort of heartfelt conversations, or they might not like to do those kinds of things. I was just like, of course, that was where they went with that. So I thought it was funny, but also, truthful, and for some folks.
I'd love to see them take that issue in season 2 and look at how it's enculturated.
Yeah.
Right. In other words, how do you raise people so that they avoid conflict? Well, you as parents avoid conflict, right? You don't discuss the subtleties, the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities, the strengths of day-to-day life. You hide it from your kids because you don't think they're strong enough. You don't think that you want them to be perpetual children or something. And so when they get out in the world, they're just not prepared to negotiate in areas that are emotionally laden. I mean, if it's, talking about what movie to go see, that's one thing, but if it's an emotionally laden topic and you haven't learned how to negotiate in that space, you often end up avoiding or yelling or something pretty binary. And I'm gonna go ahead.
Yeah, there are definitely different aspects to that. And, it's often discussed things like how in some cultures, parents don't apologize to their kids. Instead, right, they don't have the conversation, but they might do an act of service like cut fruit and, right, leave the fruit for them while they're studying or working on something. And there are different ways in which people consider conflict, confrontation, and attacked, right? Like they consider, a lot of times they say, oh, I'm confrontation avoidant, which, in actuality, what they're saying is that they don't like attacks because confrontation comes from a very different place, right? Confrontation comes from a place of caring because it is uncomfortable. And it is uncomfortable to know that you're making someone else uncomfortable with this discussion. But it's also coming from this place of, we are having this discussion because I care about you. I care about our relationship. And if we don't address this, our relationship is going to be harmed, in a different way. So I care about you more than how uncomfortable this confrontation is. Whereas an attack, the goal of that is not coming from a place of caring. That's coming from a place of, I want to hurt you. I purposefully want to do that. And so in a lot of more collectivistic cultures, confrontation is, something that people view differently because they're more concerned about the discomfort that it's going to cause the other person. And so a lot of times they're taught to swallow your own personal discomfort and to not have the confrontation. And, I just need to work through it instead. And that, of course, then can build up more resentment and a lot more of that passive aggressive communication styles. So there are, different aspects to how people communicate in different ways. And it's not necessarily to say that one is, better than or more superior than another, but that there can definitely be some outcomes that aren't so great. And, to Mr. Immortal's credit, not that he gets that much, but some of his marriages lasted quite a long time. And if he, was as avoidant of discomfort from this cowardly place as he, seemed to be, because, he jumped out of a window within their first meeting, right, with Mallory and Nikki, I would wonder, how did he last like over a decade in some of his marriages? Because clearly something must have come up at some point.
Maybe it didn't, right? I very much like what you said there about collectivist cultures, not living in one, right? Living in the United States, which is much more individualistic. I just felt and feel it was terribly important to teach my daughters how to negotiate emotional spaces and get things as clear ahead of time as you can. Doesn't always make it easy to be with them at the same, because they learn the kung fu punching at me, right? But at the same time, I can see them handling themselves in ways that their peers don't. And at the same time, if we were living in a collectivist culture, I can understand how the relational identities are so intense, right? That maybe not making a claim for your position or not putting your desires out front, which exactly what I taught my daughters to do, right? It just wouldn't fit like it might work here in the United States. So I thought that was a fantastic point.
Mhm.
All right, then. Time for my question. Sexy Josh, right? And the reason I say sexy Josh is because he's drop dead sexy, right? He's got all the moves. He's got all the language. He brings out a part of her, or I should say during the conversation, a part of her comes to the fore that we really haven't seen before. She can keep up with the banter. She can keep up. And I'm just wondering how you guys reacted to that scene. Well, Elizabeth, you had an answer in the green room, so why don't you go ahead and tell us, and then we'll talk about that. His sexy Josh.
And this totally could be, being socialized as a heterosexual woman, right, and very feminine presenting. I was suspicious of him. I was immediately like, I don't trust this guy. He seems way too good to be true.
Yeah.
And I did not notice, and perhaps I just completely missed it, but I didn't notice Josh in any other scenes talking anyone else at this wedding except to Jen, and only when she was by herself.
Yes.
Which seemed very predatory to me and opportunistic. And I was not trusting of him. I also don't know how Titania would have found out that Jen's going to be at this wedding. I don't know how the organization, this Intelligencia organization, found out she was going to be there. And so I immediately am a little suspicious of this guy. Although, there's a part of me that wants to root for something to happen for Jen. I also don't know that that's how TV works in a lot of ways.
Right. So, how about you, Brittany? How'd you react to that scene?
That's exactly where I was going to, the exact point. This is the story arc has to be, it makes the most sense if this is someone who is potentially a villain, a villainess. So it just seems natural that, hey, here's this possibly wonderful fit who's very flattering, who's charismatic, who I think the third time that he's introduced, it's as if they were talking all night, even though we only see them in snapshots. And each time that they're also talking, she's inebriated. And so you wonder what her takeaway is versus his. And I don't recall if he had a drink while they're together, really. And
right.
So, yeah. So I'm curious to see, it all kind of happened. The storyline seems like it's heading that way, that this person is now incognito, that he is going to manipulate her in a way that obtains some sort of truth, potentially puts her in a vulnerable situation. If this is a somehow lovely love story, I doubt, but it seems she is clumsy in love and clumsy in life. And I foresee, if it's not some sort of villainous character, then it would be a very clumsy love story. I don't think that it would be perfect either way.
Yeah. How about you, Shelly?
I agree with Elizabeth and Brittany. So I also was skeptical of him because he seemed too good to be true and too charming and just wonderful and just happened to be there. And they allude to this, trying to get She-Hulk's blood. He could be in a position to try to get it if he was working, for the bad guys in this story. So I was very much skeptical of him because he's probably too good to be true. And most heterosexual men aren't that wonderful when you first up, and they're not as charming, or they're like, I think I like you just as you are, kind of. I mean, he said all the right things.
All the right things. All the moves.
Things.
I mean, I'm surprised he didn't dance, and he was an amazing samba dancer. I mean, it was just there. I got to tell you, I was surprised when she was throwing up that it wasn't his hand on her shoulder. with Titania, like, and like, why? Because I was expecting him, because I assumed he was being fairly authentic. So you're right. When you watch the end of the show and you've got him on the screen and someone's viewing them in a room and they're on that Intelligencia site, and then they're looking at the blood sample they tried, or skin sample they got from her in an earlier episode, it's like, okay. And oh, by the way, the name was Hulk King. So I don't know, for the Hulk expert in the crowd, if Hulk King means anything that you know of. I mean,
No,
I think it's a play on hulking.
Yeah.
Right? Like you even have she-hulking. Wait.
Yes, I do. Right there. Yes.
Okay. There it is.
Yeah.
I can't get on the screen.
It's mirrored probably. Yeah.
yeah.
I just
oh,
go
sorry.
ahead. No,
I was gonna
please
say
go ahead.
the kind of that website and the sort of incel-esque, was I was glad that they showed that, like, women oftentimes who are in public have death threats, have rape threats, people are saying horrible things about them on the internet, which they've kind of alluded to all season about things that were being said on Twitter.
Right.
But that seeing that website, that's something that real women have to deal with all the time, even not famous women. There's an academic version of that for Soch and Crim, and I've been on it before. So there's a post, Shelly C, on there, so I'm pretty sure it's me.
Wow.
But like the fact that women can't exist in the world without usually men, threatening rape and murder and talking about all these horrible things. I think, it's part of this story, but it's also part of our larger culture in this digital age.
Yeah.
Brittani, did you want to say something?
No, I just, as soon as this portion came up, I didn't think that it was going to go this way, but it makes a lot of sense just socially. And because we continue to go back to social justice issues, this was their modern day 4chan, right? Or something similar too. It's like the worst version of Reddit. And it is unfortunate that these are like kind of like what, piggybacking on what Shelly said, this is the reality of a lot of people in the world, period. And I don't think that this conversation would be had with anybody else. I don't see Captain America having to have this issue. I do not see Iron Man having to have this issue. I do not see Batman or beyond, DC, Marvel, anything. And in whatever context, even the other women or like feminine presenting people, like Wanda wouldn't have had this. And so what is it about this person in a powerful role? Because we know that a lot of supers are highly intelligent, but here is a working woman. And what is it about her that these kind of conversations can exist, whereas her counterparts don't have that same space? Because I don't want to say just supers, because I don't feel like just is the correct word, but because their heroicism is kind of the foundation of who they are, whereas her foundation is a lawyer.
Yes.
Have this superpower. And so I it's interesting that this is a really, really perfect opportunity to have those conversations and to interject, okay, what is it about her that this fits so perfectly?
So I do have a question, because in my recollection, the way that the ex-wives found out about Mr. Immortal was also through Intelligencia. And so I'm not quite sure if they are necessarily an incel group, or are they anti-superheroes? Are they anti-powers? And so I don't know who might actually be on this site and who else are they, working against in different ways. I think in some ways it's an allude to the leader from the comics. And at the same time, it is a great commentary on internet culture and trolling people and, various different types of things. Also, they don't seem to have as much information about things because, well, one, if they wanted Hulk blood, they could go after Banner, and they don't. So that, that also says something. Or if they have, we haven't heard anything about it. But also part of the reason why, and in my understanding of the comics of why Banner turns out the way he does, is because his father was into gamma radiation stuff way long ago, and actually was exposing Bruce to that as a child, along with a lot of abuse and a lot of things that make it harder for Bruce to manage his Hulk form. Where Jen does not necessarily have that issue much, right? Because she didn't grow up with as much abuse. She didn't grow up seeing her mother murdered in front of her, right? She didn't grow up with like that almost DID like amount of trauma that Bruce encountered. But what she does have is she's related to him. And because their genetics are so much more similar, I think that she can withstand the Hulk form, excuse me, in a way that I'm not sure that this group, even if they do collect this blood sample, are going to be able to do as much. Now, it's possible that they might bring up the Abomination again, and right, trying to get some of his blood and trying to see what they can do with that. But I don't know that they're going to be as successful. I don't know what they're trying or what they're attempting yet. And it's going to be interesting to see how that turns out.
Yeah. So the thing that I was left with after they go onto their website, Intelligencia, and they see all the hate statements, they have a conversation. Nikki and Mallory have a conversation about what to do. And I think we all have that conversation all the time with ourselves and with our friends living in this environment. So I wouldn't mind having a bit of a conversation about what to do. I think it'll all come from our individual differences in terms of what we would do, but I'm just interested in hearing all of your thoughts on how do we handle the situation. We find a friend who's has this sort of thing being said about them in a space that they may not know about.
So, like I said, there is an actual website that does this for Soc and crim people. And this has been the reality where friends of mine and then myself was on there. And there was an issue where a friend of ours was reading on the site that someone was trying to find the home address of one of our friends. And so we had to tell her, like we didn't tell her the other stuff that was being said about her, but then when they were trying to find her home address to, send police there to say that she was like, doing something that wouldn't require being arrested, we had to tell her. And she was legit afraid of being in her house. And so for me personally, like there's this horrible site. And so people are saying things all the time about like real people that I know. And I don't go on there, but if somebody I know goes on there and they're like, hey, this is going on, I usually don't tell them unless it's like putting them in danger, because they're just horrible things about the person. It's not them knowing is just gonna make them feel bad. When I was on there though, I mean, I felt bad for a minute, but then I was like, I've made it. Like I made it to that site. I was like, I'm doing something right with my career. But they also weren't trying to get my home address to send the police to my house to report, So for me personally, unless it's like immediate danger, I probably won't tell someone because it will make them just feel bad.
I think
Brittani, Elizabeth, go ahead, please.
I think for me, it depends on a lot of different contexts and situations. And so I come from a political home. My mom was a state representative. She was running for Senate before she passed away. And I know how private she tried to keep our lives. But I am the youngest of 6. There's a lot of us. And so you hear things around the city, you hear things around the state, you hear things around the country. And I think that she did so in protecting us kids who are living in the home of if I were to see or hear something, I have to be as safe as possible. I have to be a safe person. And so I think that she would probably prefer, or I would probably prefer not knowing, because it's exhausting. And so like, and I remember my mom waited to announce, like to run for Senate, because my dad was going through chemo, and she couldn't do it, or she didn't want to do it because of the things that she would hear about him. And she couldn't emotionally handle that, simply because of all the attack ads and so otherwise. And this is before really social media. This is in 2004. And I think about how all of these people have to be very, very careful in how they present in the world, because even when they're not careful, it doesn't matter. There's going to be people who are awful and ill-advised, and who think their way, their views, their beliefs are superior. And sometimes with really noble pursuits, and sometimes just being misguided. And I want to be the person who is like, I would tell them out of my concern, but that would be my anxiety. That's my anxiety, my fear. I do not get to decide somebody else's anxiety and fear. And I want to be as careful and as safe as a friend and as a person. I think Nikki did what she believed was right in the moment of, hey, this Mallory had said, don't do it, but I'm not that person. And we each have this life and all these experiences that justify our reasons. And I think that both Nikki and Mallory's choice was right for them and everything in between. And so regardless if you are more conservative in how you protect information, or if you're more liberal with it, I think it just goes back to your own life experiences, your own values, your own morals. Because at the end of the day, the if is the thing I think most people are anxious about. If I say nothing and then something happens, was I in the wrong? And if nothing comes of this, and then I still put this stuff in this person's head, and now they're worried about it. They're trying to figure out if they should relocate. They're trying to figure out how to keep what's a safe word if there's some kind of intruder. Like, if I'm causing and perpetuating more fear, am I doing the right thing? And that's a case by case situation.
No, I love it. How about you, Elizabeth?
No, absolutely. I think it was a great representation to have both people having different ways of going about it, to really show that, whether you have a friend that's telling you something, if it's something like, oh, someone's cheating on you, or, oh, right, people are talking about you. If you have a friend that tells you, you have a friend that doesn't, it doesn't necessarily mean that either one betrayed you. They could both be trying to look out for you, but they do it in their own ways, right? Something that matches with their values, beliefs, their cultural understandings of things. I think it also alludes back to most recently, people became aware of some ways in which people do not tell people uncomfortable news. After the movie The Farewell came out in the US, and people were like, oh, how do you just not tell someone that they have a diagnosis like that, a health diagnosis, which was the theme of the movie, was that a member of the family, an elder, was diagnosed with something, and the family wasn't going to tell the matriarch, the grandmother, about this. And people do that out of a place of caring. And people do things in a way of, oh, I'm not trying to harm this person. And at the same time, both are coming from places of caring, whether you are warning someone or not. And I think that was great that they both were able to do that.
Yeah, what I love about this conversation is slowly but surely training our culture to try to stop trying to protect its emotions with absolute notions of right and wrong, right? Because the minute we feel bad about it, it was wrong. The minute we feel good about it, it was right. And if we don't pay attention to what we're doing, it's protecting our emotions and our self-evaluations. And if we can, I would argue, train people to maybe be a little more pluralistic, which is what we're talking about here, which is respecting everybody's approach to these things. suddenly we find ourselves appreciating pluralism a little more, which is basically diversity, right? So the thing is, Hollywood, I haven't seen this show get stuck on notions of right and wrong. I've seen Jen's been negotiating every context she's in. All the characters have been negotiating contexts, and I hope it doesn't pass the audience by, right? I hope they recognize that what you're seeing is nuanced characters living nuanced lives and not people struggling to be right or wrong, because way too much of our media is about whether or not you were right or wrong, and not recognizing that that's your own emotions. Looking for absolutes is a dangerous space. So Elizabeth or Brittany, do you guys have any questions for us? I mean, all of us, the whole crew here.
I think some of the things that are really fun and important to talk about include how Jen was treated at the wedding, and some of those experiences of no matter how great you're doing professionally, or hey, you got superpowers, it's like, oh, so are you dating anyone? Right. I think that's a pretty important theme to talk about as far as worth, as far as like social conditioning. And I think it also goes to those aspects of, you know, even when people come home for Thanksgiving or something like that, right? Like, what are the questions that the family is actually asking them?
Yep.
Are they trying to get to know what your life is really like? Or are they trying to, you know, work on their own anxieties of, you know, like, are you having a good life because these are the things that you need to have a good life? Yep. Or are they, you know, working on these ideas of, you know, are
you what I need you to be so that I can be who I want to be? Right. That's where the judgy stuff comes from. And it's amazing how that doesn't get talked about. I'm just going to quickly say that scene where she tells her friend all the great things she's doing. And her friend says, well, you know, are you dating someone? That's diagnostic. Let people's words diagnose them for you. What that means is I'm not going to talk to you with that. I'm going to talk to you at this level where I'm comfortable. And the fact that that deflection happens, that's their kung fu, that's their move. And you've got to see that this person does not care about me. And it's not like that's bad. It's just like, okay, I know where my vulnerabilities go with this person. I'm not going to make myself vulnerable in their presence. They've told me who they are already. So no, I appreciate you bringing up that scene, because I thought that whole issue of not a single person has asked her what it's like to be her. Not a single character in the show has asked her what it's like to be her. Maybe Nikki a little bit here and there, but they haven't really given Nikki those kind of scenes. But those are the people you want to keep in your life, is the word I'll use. What's it like to be you today? Right. And go ahead, please.
Yeah, when I'm watching it, I'm thinking about like the Bechdel, right? Test. About how often are we having conversations that don't have to do about romantic love or interest? And it's something I brought up earlier. In my, I think that scene was a perfect conversation to say, what are women's roles? What are women's worth in this heteronormative world of what's the most that you can achieve? And oftentimes the most that you can achieve is not being alone. And that is quite unfortunate. And as I'm on this pod with these wonderfully brilliant women, it's thinking, do we have to define ourselves in these ways? Does it mean more to have a man than have a doctorate? Does it mean more to differentiate what being alone versus being lonely is? And I think that although Jen is seeking throughout the season some sort of connection, I don't think that she's desperate to not be alone. And sometimes that, I think in the episode where they're, you know, where she's creating the dating site, I think that straddled the line, but I think throughout her life is a conversation, not just this one aspect or element. And so I always think about how meaningful is this? How many conversations do they have outside of work? And because most of the conversations are those two things. And is there more character development besides her working and wanting to date?
Yeah, so this I'm sure has happened to a lot of us, where you have something really great professional and you tell somebody when they say, how are you? I'm like, oh, this great thing just happened. And then they're like, they shut it down. They're like, how's, your dating life, or how's your child, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so this used to make me really angry for years and years. I always say I'm the Hulk on the inside with the Punisher a little bit.
Right.
And I used to get really mad because I was just like, no one cares that I like wrote all these books or won this award. Like, why aren't people talking to me about this like awesome stuff? And a friend of mine gave me some tough love and said, because they don't understand that, Shelly. That's not what their world is. And so, you can be angry about it, or you can just understand that, like, for them, their world is having that boyfriend. It is having that child. And so after I was like, well, that's BS first was my reaction. But then I was like, you know what? You're right. And I need to let go of some of that anger. And that's not going to be who I share that with. And with Jen, like, that person that she hadn't seen in a long time, that's not her person. That's not her friend that she can talk about that with. However, even if they don't understand, I still think they can acknowledge and say, that is awesome. Great job. Then they can go into talking about the things that they do know about.
Right.
But I've tried to kind of, I don't know what the word is, comfort myself, I guess, whenever I'm having those conversations that aren't kind of going the way I wish that they would.
And then you go out in the world and you find those people who, hey, I just got this book published. Dude, that's awesome. Blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, you're at a bar having a drink, celebrating, right? And you got to find them, though. And, in those positions where you're being yourself, talking about the things you value, and you get cut off by the context you're in, you have the reaction you've mentioned. And then there's another one I have later on is, what was I doing that made me look condescending? Was there something I was doing that was, and you know what? No, it doesn't have to be that I was being condescending. We're both living in our Coen brother bubbles, and they need to protect their life, right? And if you're out doing stuff that they haven't done, they, just because of the bubble they have, can feel bad about not doing what you've done, whereas you in your bubble can feel bad about not doing stuff they've done. And instead of just letting everybody be in their Coen brother bubbles and teaching people how to manage bubbles together, which we don't get training on, what we do is we end up bouncing up against each other, and people become defensive, and we think, did I do that? And we don't get to the fact that we all have, I shouldn't say Coen brother bubbles, I should say Wanda bubbles, because ever since I saw WandaVision, they just made a whole damn town a bubble, right? And but yeah, I think looking at people that way kind of helps me in those situations when I think, did I do something wrong? Did I say something wrong? Or why don't they get me? Yeah.
I did finally think of a question.
Cool.
I'll respond later because I have lots of thoughts. And I guess if there's a difference, what do you think of Jen and Tatiana's relationship versus Jen and She-Hulk's relationship? Is there a difference? And how did you guys think about it as it presented on screen?
I'm not going first. I'm letting
I love that you brought that up, because that was also, maybe not to this extent, but I think bringing up the relationship between Titania and She-Hulk is an important piece in a lot of ways, because Titania is not actually against Jen Walker. She doesn't really care about Jen Walker very much, right? I mean, obviously she, threw the first punch when Jen was down. But she's not really interested in her. She's like, no, you have to change. And like, this is who I want to fight. But, you know, to be that invested in a rivalry with someone, to come out with a product line, to show up at a wedding, to do all of these different things, it's very intriguing in a lot of ways. But I don't know that it's as similar as Jen's relationship to She-Hulk, in that seems to be more at peace. So it's more to when Bruce kind of made that, you know, connection with his Hulk self, and he's still able to have that intelligent aspect to himself while in Hulk form, where, you know, Jen is able to do that with her form of hulking out as well. Whereas previously, you know, the Hulk was more of like a separate identity. It was a, you know, different part that Bruce was really fighting against in a lot of ways. And it was following him around. He couldn't get rid of it, right? Like it's there with him. And Titania is definitely annoyingly around a lot for her, but I don't know that it's the same kind of thing, in that, you know, when it comes to her being in Hulk form, she definitely has a little bit more control. And it seems a lot more integrated. And I do think that there is this level of acceptance that she's coming towards, right? Like, especially as the episodes continue, whereas she and Titania are, it's still like this mysterious reasoning of like, why are you so obsessed with me?
So I want a couple things thinking about this. I'm glad you asked this question, Brittany. I feel like Titania comes at it in a very female way. So when we see male superheroes, they just come at it, they fight. Like, there's not this, like, I don't know if sneaky is the right word, but it's like Mean Girls, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to show up here. I'm not here for you. Like, I'm doing my thing. And like, then I'm going to come at you. And so in the female world, if you have female friends, or I was in a sorority in my undergrad, you have women will come at each other in different ways. And I know they end up physically fighting, but her presence there and lying about the presence and trying to make Jen look bad is a very Mean Girl way. And so I picked up on that. I also like that we have a female villain in the same extent, because it's, you know, it's always males. So I do appreciate that. And her relationship with She-Hulk, the thing I noticed the most, other than what Elizabeth said, which she does seem to be more in control, is she has confidence, which is, I think, something as Jen, she doesn't have a lot of. And I hope that maybe those things will kind of cross over, where we'll see more confidence with her as Jen.
Yeah, last week I asked the question, is Jen the everywoman? In other words, is the character of Jen being used to contrast different forms of being a woman? And so, yes, I could sit here and say I have a sense of who Jen is, and her relationship to She-Hulk for me is one of ideation, right? She-Hulk is who she, as Jen, kind of wishes she could be all the time. I mean, in the show, she can be She-Hulk all the time if she wants. At the same time, the minute she walks into that with that dress as She-Hulk, she's it. And everybody's looking at her, and everybody's talking about her, and of course the bride gets a bit upset. So I think what I love about She-Hulk being an ideation is that she's so diverse from all the people that Jen encounters in her life. So I like this idea of ideation not being a tall white male with lots of money. Mallory's not her ideation, right? It's She-Hulk's who she wants to be. That's the vibe I get. In terms of Titania, for me, I don't know. I just experienced Jen as basically a context for exploring different forms of being a woman.
Mhm.
And so Titania is just one of the different contrasts that they're portraying. And the fact that at the end, she falls on her face in a horrible way, loses her veneers, and she's ultimately humiliated and runs out with the cake. That just shows us a huge amount of vulnerability, right? I'm not even going to use the word weakness. I think the word vulnerability allows a backstory to have an influence on why she's behaving like she does. So that's how I take it. I see Jen more as a medium for discussing those issues.
So when I see the relationship develop, there's a couple things that pop up to me, is that here is a hero and here is a villain in which the male gaze isn't as important. Where we see them fight and their clothes are on.
Well said.
They're mostly on. And we don't have that.
There's no mud, right?
There's not a chance where, half of them pop out or something. There's And in something as simple as Jen taking off her high heels in court. Like these little details of people don't necessarily run around and fight with heels on. And I also like that both of these characters, their ability is strength. And it's not hiding behind it. I don't want to say hiding, because I think that's too crass, but like, they're not behind a shield. They're not behind some kind of weaponry or something else. They're just strong and athletic and fast and capable. And so I think that is a really interesting dynamic between the two of them. There's a part of me that is, you straddle the line between like, what is women's empowerment? What is feminism? What is, everybody to each their own, everyone can exist in the same space and no one's right or wrong. And there's part of me that hates the cattiness of the She-Hulk line. Of I'm just going to do this to one up you, as if there is some sort of scarcity complex. There can be. And I don't love that narrative, but the reality of the situation is that exists for women in the workplace, that exists in the world, that exists in spaces in which if there's so little for me, if I don't take it all or take some of it, they'll be taken from me. And so that attention from Titania had to feel so difficult to struggle and here's somebody who is as big and as bad and as glamorous and as beautiful as me, and how insecure do I have to be because of it? We don't see any other supers, like any other female characters in the show thus far, because they have wonderful cameos. But just thinking about the insecurities that is in this heteronormative world that is women of, this, like I said, the scarcity complex. But I did like those two parts of, okay, what does it mean to be a strong, powerful woman with my clothes on? And how do we show up in this, like Shelly said, this mean girls type of way? Because it does happen, because I have to put you down so that I can succeed, so that I can advance, so I can move forward. And it's real. It happens every single day. It's going to happen all the time. And every time I look at them, I wonder what their relationship is going to evolve into, if it's just going to be two women who hate each other forever, or going to be something where they show up for each other at some point, because it doesn't work the other way. It doesn't work forever that way. It can't work forever. This is another social question of, how do we see each other stand up for each other? And shouldn't we? Because I don't think that, Titania is this horrible person. I think it's just more nuanced and more complex. So,
having this conversation, it shows why the two storylines were in the same episode, right? Because here you have two women fighting, And then you have the other storyline where they're sitting around a table resolving their issues in a way that's open, in a way that's social justice oriented and fair, and clearly situated in patriarchy, right? And a history of abuse. So I think the writer said what you wanted to. I think she said what you wanted to. And Jen looked guilty. I appreciated after Titania walked off, Jen felt guilty, and that's how guilt plays out, right? Your emotions just quickly turn from stop hurting me to, oh my God, look at what I did. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Titania if they end up teaming up somehow in the end.
Yeah. And possibly against the Abomination or like another character that reemerges.
Yeah.
That's definitely a possibility. And as y'all were talking, it occurred to me that although Titania is strong as well, for the majority of the time that she's fighting against Jen, she's not using her physical strength as Shelly, you mentioned, she's doing the mean girls thing. She's trying to use humiliation. Right? Like, I'm going to gaslight you to make it look like you're the one that's crazy, or I'm going to, make you look like a fool for not patenting your own name. Yes. And it's almost Roadrunner Coyote-esque in the attempts, right, to attack her, and then ends up being the one being embarrassed. Right. Yeah. And I do think, it does foreshadow a variety of things, including them coming together, possibly working together, making some things happen in a different way. And I do look forward to some sort of reconciliation, in that way of, coming together, possibly and very likely against a common enemy.
That makes me think of, just to jump in, there are ways to be calculative, but it feels very calculative emotionally in this world. And I wonder how many other ways it's more logistical in some other shows and some other relationships, other dynamics. And why is that? How is that? How do those things play out? Is it intentional? I'm sure to an extent, but it is, like you said, very like emotionally manipulative. I'm doing this to hurt somebody and show their vulnerabilities in a lot of different ways and not just in the physical way.
But that's how women operate in a lot of instances, unfortunately. And so when I think about Titania, I feel like she just needs to have like somebody love her, which sounds so corny for me to say that. But she reminds me of a lot of, like I said, mean girls or bullies who, didn't have like love and support. I'm going to sound like a Care Bear here, but I was like, if somebody cared about her, maybe Jen's going to be that person. I don't know, but she seems really mean for no real reason other than maybe being jealous of She-Hulk or jealous of Jen. And it's one of the things when I think about her, I'm like, what is her motivation? Why is she so mean? And maybe we'll find that out. We just don't know yet.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, for a lawyer who seeks justice and, for a superhero show that's about justice, as you talk about this, I also think of this quote from Dr. Cornel West, which is that justice is what love looks like in public.
Oh.
Right. And how much does Titania need that?
Yeah.
Right? Like her own justice. Yeah.
Well, I gotta tell you, listening to all you, I mean, there's a scene where she slaps the phone out of the hand. What are you posting this for your 11 followers on Instagram? And on the one hand, it's funny, and yes, on the other hand, it's tragic in the sense that these forms of interaction are addictive. And when we get likes, I shouldn't use the collective we. Often when people get likes, it's like someone saying, I like you, and they're not there. And I can see a world of people organizing their identities around that, what psychologists would call those kind of reinforcers, right? What people don't understand is once you go down that route, it's not just social media, it's any form of fame, right? Once you go down that road as your identity, you often don't realize that your identity now becomes vulnerable to the whims of the public. And that's why so many pop stars change their style, because they want to get that connection and continue to get that connection. And I think it's important that we look at, I'm just going to use the word ambition, right? Because ambition, I try to tell people, please be aware of your ambitions. Because if you're not aware of your ambitions, you're going to start blaming the world for your life when the things that you want don't come true. In other words, admit what you wanted. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be the president or wanting to be this or that. It's just those things put you in a space that you rarely can control, right? And you finding yourself at the whim of forces you didn't imagine you'd be at the whim of. And so I kind of see Titania as a sort of embodiment of that vulnerable space of fame, or I don't know, popularity, whatever, which goes right back to the Mean Girls thing, right? Wait a minute. And, Brittany's comment about scarcity. Wait a minute, if you're getting their likes, I'm not getting their likes. That's not good, even though, you can actually give more than one person likes, right? I'm sure people are looking at each other's page and friend totals and all that kind of stuff to figure out where they rank in the world of this sort of stuff. And there's just incredible vulnerability that comes with capitulating your values and your desires and your identity to forces over which you have no control, or at least minimal influence. Very, very difficult.
Absolutely.
Any other? Oh, please go ahead.
Oh, no, I was saying absolutely. But yeah, other things that I think are important just to mention is that we finally get to see Jen's new clothes.
Yeah.
And what did y'all think? Do we like the blue polka dot? What do we think?
I really like it.
I thought it looked great. I thought it looked bold. It was a bold outfit. And of course, I love stylish dress, so I thought it was on target.
I'm gonna go, I keep skipping back to previous episodes, but I'm thinking about when the designers, comments about her clothing and just everyone's comments about clothing. It's like, well, I don't want you to walk around looking like a frat boy who's like defending himself. Like, statements like that are deciding what people should wear and how people should wear it. And I think that this goes on a spectrum of like what people deem as sexy or appropriate in the workplace and in life. And I think about when more curvy or voluptuous people wear certain clothes in the workplace, when loose fitting, what does that appear as? And this is across the spectrum of a lot of people. And it goes back to that line of, as long as, because She-Hulk walks in and feels so empowered and so sexy and so feminine, and you know that she's owning it. And just the statements about like the She-Hulk hair versus Jen's hair. It is, what do I think is sexy? What do I think is, I don't know, beautiful? And it just keeps going back to this, yes, to each their own, whatever empowers you, empowers you. These conversations should happen to a lot of different people, even if it doesn't concern you. This is how we teach ethics. This is how we teach how to respect other people in the workplace. Not to toot on it, but like, this is why the Me Too movement really started occurring, and thinking more compassionately with people. And the cop out of being like, well, then how do I talk to women then? It's silly. Just talk and interact as a noble, normal person.
Well, a few lessons when they're growing up wouldn't hurt.
Yes.
I mean, I'm being serious. How to talk to people, how to have a conversation. I think quite often many people are just caught up in raising kids that are perpetuations of their own identity. And I'm not trying to be judgy. It's just that what doesn't get asked at the dinner table every day is, what's it like to be you today? And then suddenly you get to safely put that in the world. And suddenly you just get used to people treating you in a space where no one has to be anything in particular. And if you don't grow up in that space, by the time you're 12, I'm not a developmental psychologist, but if people have been telling you what you're supposed to be every day for 12 years, it's just how your brain works, and it takes a lifetime to reorganize it. That's why narratives of leaving your family, going somewhere else are so intense, because it really is, you're carrying all that with you. And so I think a few lessons up front. We just have a lot of training to do.
Sure.
In this culture.
No, but I do love that, we're also talking about how people are viewed when it comes to the way that they dress or the way that they present, how much of that is policed in different ways, especially for women who, for some reason, have way more dress code related rules in schools and in a variety of places.
Yeah.
And, in addition, we also have what is showing Jen and her personality and, what looks good on her. And as her designer said, I don't make basic shit. So, when it came to the blue polka dots, initially I was like, is it what I anticipated? Is this as amazing as he made it sound like he was going to make it? And I was thinking about it and I was like, what do most wedding guests tend to wear? Is it like floral? Is it right? And I was like, I don't know that She-Hulk would wear a floral dress to a wedding. And and so I was like, oh, but would she wear a solid? How is the polka dots? And so there were a variety of things where I was like, oh, you know what? I dig it. I dig
blue
it.
Green,
the colors that were chosen.
Blue or green is a powerful comment. It's a powerful statement, right? It wasn't like red. So, complementary color stuff or anything. It was just straight up blue, green, and powerful.
Yeah. So I do think that it was a great choice in a lot of ways, costume wise. And I also noticed that her bridesmaid's dress seemed large on her again. And there was that question of, was it sized for her Hulk form? And now that she's not allowed to be a Hulk at this wedding, which is another form of policing her appearance and her strengths and her attributes, which later on was appreciated, right? She-Hulk's at my wedding.
Yeah.
Which was fun. But it is something intriguing in a lot of ways. And it's definitely something that people encounter a lot more. And some people encounter it more than others, this critique on their appearance and what kind of appearance is more acceptable, right? Is it the curly hair, short hair Jen version, or is it the long, straight, sultry kind of hair that they're, talking about and which is better, etc. Then of course comes into these ideas about superiority versus appreciation for different looks and, those ways. But it's also that, piece of for a lot of people, like coming into their own and finding their own style. And, there's that question of, has Jen found, herself and figured out who she is and how she wants to present? Because in some ways she does seem to want to be more like Mallory. And, so there are these, pieces to that. I also think it was really great that we got more backstory on Mallory.
Yes. And the way it was presented was brilliant, because last week we talked about her and her borders with Jen, or the week before when Jen said, "Oh, I'm so glad we're friends now." She goes, whoa, back up. And this time she, opened up to Nikki a bit, but it's still, then I think she even pulled back a little bit there and said, that's enough questions. She's managing her borders. And what I love about that is, here's someone who understands their own bubble. And they're going to be in a world where you get to respect yourself. I'm not going to just be defensive. I'm going to tell you, you've gone too far in my space,
Mhm.
and not a hostile way. And I almost think that's about the best we can do.
Mhm.
Is, respect the fact that we're going to have different bubbles, and then train ourselves not to be so defensive when people come into ours, unless of course it's too egregious. But no, I absolutely love that. I was going to say Shelly's going to get sick of me mentioning David Bowie, but one of the things I absolutely loved about David Bowie was the perpetual change in identity as a Warhol way of living, just to show the world, I can wear this outfit today, I can be this tomorrow, I can be that tomorrow, and being that persistent agitator of our ideas of stability and identity, right? And just keep pushing it. Elizabeth, you mentioned leaning into style as a way to putting yourself into the world. I do think identity is ultimately social, and I think we all end up carving out a space for ourselves in relation to everyone we've been around, and clothes are a way to do it. And it's full of policing, to say the least. Absolutely. And we're seeing it in extreme forms in certain parts of the world right now, where people have had enough.
I think some people have been seeing it for a long time. I think some people are becoming more aware of other people's experiences with it, for sure. And, it is an interesting, piece in a lot of ways, because I hope that those types of, or these types of conversations definitely bring about people's reflective, nature of, oh, how have I maybe perpetuated some of that, and what kinds of ways in which, that can be improved upon in different ways, or have I, judged someone based off of their clothing or their hair, or these different pieces. And hopefully we'll see more growth and more acceptance versus, some of that.
I gotta tell you, go ahead, Brittany. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say it definitely continues to pop up in the world, even as something as it seems nuanced, but this idea of I keep thinking about her hair, and California is the only state in which I can wear my hair like this and don't risk being fired.
That's right.
That is insane.
Wow. It is
for
insane.
lack of a better term. And it is. I think about my I coach, and I think about my students who had a walkout because they weren't allowed to wear leggings at school because the quote unquote boys couldn't control themselves. And bravo to them. And in these types of settings, and trying to decide, because clothing does matter, not just culturally, but just not and socially, but economically, identity formation, like you were saying, Scott, it shows and represents a lot. And how I want to be perceived, how I view myself, is going to, at the end of the day, come down to a lot of how we present on the exterior. And She-Hulk is unique because she has no one uniform. She does not fight or assemble in a certain look. Whereas you have Wonder Woman, who has a specific outfit. You have other characters who look a specific way each time that they show up. And Bruce and She-Hulk, just rip their clothes or have
right.
And this is a conversation, at least that she did go to a designer that the big thing that he did was find spandex that changed different sizes. And if you look at her dress as She-Hulk versus you look at her dress as Jen, it's not as if the dress stayed the same. It was so much longer and so much bigger on Jen. And so if the mystery was it looked both on it looked the same on both, then I would be like, oh wow, that's a really awesome designer. It's really just I'm fitting clothes for She-Hulk that Jen can swim in.
Exactly.
And so it's and then does that mean that She-Hulk is the priority? Because then this identity of Jen is the leftover pieces, literally, Like you get to exist in the world outside of She-Hulk. You get to exist this oversized, life.
Yeah.
Because we can't fit it to you. We have to fit it to this other persona of yours.
So look, if my daughters ever watch this and they heard me in this conversation and did not mention the fact that we did have discussions about their clothing when they were young women and growing up, then they would Twitter me to death and let the world know that we had those discussions. And what I will add is, while there were concerns I admit I had about the world, they won. They wore what they wanted to wear, and I felt it was my job. I'm going to use the word to make them aware of some vulnerabilities in this world we live in. Not to tell them not to do, but to go into the world with eyes wide open. And I don't know. I'm not sure everybody would agree that's healthy, but it's not unrelated to the conversation we had earlier about, you see something on the internet about a friend, do you tell them? You're out in the world in a patriarchy you grew up in. Do you tell your girls about that space? And the answer, as far as I'm concerned, is hell yes. Manage it, do what you want. And I like just to say, manage your vulnerabilities.
But it's a both and.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's both and for a lot of topics. It's a both and that there's a scarcity complex and women should support women. There's a both and that feminine while still being covered up. It's a both and that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I appreciate you validating my struggles as a parent, because it is a both and. Yeah.
Well, like you were saying, like I think about, we are going to have, like, as a Black person, I have the talk about how to interact with police. But I also have the talk about when you're walking down, a dark alley at night, or if you're running in the morning, you have to be aware. It's both. Right. It's unfortunate that's the reality, but it does exist.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, then. Do we have any other issues we want to address regarding this episode? All right, then. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this fantastic conversation. Brittani, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find you on social media, if you're so inclined, giving the conversation we had today? And we'll start with Brittani.
Hi, I am on Instagram at @BeTherapeutic, like Bumble.
Fantastic. How about you, Elizabeth?
I'm on Instagram and most of the social media accounts as Lizzie NS, N as in Nancy, S as in Sam.
Fantastic. How about you, Shelly?
At Dr. Clevenger on Twitter.
Excellent. You can find all episodes of She-Hulking on YouTube at the Dark Loops Productions channel. If you'd like to write in, let us know we got it right. Let us know we got it wrong. Feel free to do so to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com, or feel free to just write a comment on this YouTube page. So there it is. From all of us to all of you, big hugs. And remember, smash the patriarchy.
Patriarchy.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.